very sorry, everyone, for starting so late. I do need about half an hour prep time before a lecture. And so the way lectures are scheduled, with the last lecture wanting to, I don't know, convert his file or upload something, it's just not going to be working, and I will have to talk to the department chair about that, but I hope that we can get onto the right schedule. So because we are starting so late, I'm going to have to go a little faster than I'd like. But, so I would like to get a sense of how you're doing. We've had remote learning for a couple of weeks. That was a big transition, as it was for me. And we've had a couple of quizzes. And if I can get sort of a show of hands, are you feeling sort of red or orange? Really great, you've got this, you feel confident. Nobody? Okay, I need that feedback. It gives me a sense of where we are. What if are you okay? Okay? All right, I like that. And then maybe a bit of anxiety, struggling a little, and more in the, okay. All right.
A little bit.
A little bit, okay, so we'll work on that. Today in lecture we cover in learning, so there's different kinds of learning, classical, operant, observational, talk about the biological basis of learning, and I'll cover learning styles. I'm going to have to go, I'm acting as if I'm starting a lecture off the top, and it's like 1 o'clock, but it's not, it's 1:22, so I will have to go a little faster than I'd like. But there is a need for a note taker, and if you're interested in taking notes for the class, contact FSC note-taking at SMU.ca, and that would go on your co-curricular record. Sometimes people ask, well, why would anyone need a note taker? Or say, well, you don't need a note taker because the lecture videos are posted. But in fact, if someone has a disability, that means that they need to have a note taker. It doesn't really help to say, well, you can just go watch the lecture again, right? Because there's a skill or an ability involved in synthesizing information and putting it down and summarizing, right? So it wouldn't answer that need really just to say, oh, well, everything's posted. So if someone's interested in doing that, that would be lovely, and please contact that address there. I'm going to skip that, but the one thing I want to say from that is a couple of students did identify that there was an error in the quiz 2 grading key. I fixed that sort of halfway through, so it won't affect some of you, but it was on question 22. And so the correct answer was that it was, I think, the dependent variable. And I'm going to be meeting with the Brightspace people to see if I can mass fix that for everyone. But what that means for you now is that it's possible that some of you will be getting a 3% of the student score. The average with that in mind is about 60. That's a little bit lower than 63 with the first class last year. However, I'm not making you do practice testing this time. So I'm expecting the class average would be a little lower because I'm taking out practice tests. However, that's actually an okay place to start, and it was the last year's class who made it to the point where they were getting an A average. Because when you take a test, that test doesn't just reflect your knowledge. It reflects a lot of other things. It reflects your anxiety level. It represents how well you can read the question, how well you prepare your notes. That's a skill that you're going to learn over time, so I completely expect that the average scores will move up. And we can talk about those skills. Now, I was going to get you to watch a video of a microwave where it beeps at the end. And since we don't have the time for that, I'm going to ask you, is there anything that might happen to your body when you hear a microwave beeping?
Think about food being ready.
Do you feel anything going on in what might happen in your mouth?
Salivating?
Yeah, it does. So when I play this, and if it beeps, you might salivate. And what's going on there? Why would you salivate to a beep?
Because
food is ready.
Exactly. It's a sign, right? Your body has learned that microwave beeping means food is coming. Now, of course, you might smell the food as well, but this works even if you can't smell, because you have learned that association. Another thing that represents, this is called classical conditioning we're talking about, is something called anticipatory nausea and vomiting. So people who have cancer and they're getting chemotherapy can feel very sick from the treatment. And once they've gone to the treatment center, gotten the treatment, felt sick, right? Let's say that's happened once, twice. Actually, your body's very primed to learn what makes it sick and to sort of remember that. And so sometimes people who have cancer, they go to the chemo center and they start feeling sick as soon as they get there. Just smelling those kind of those clinic smells and seeing the clinic setting. Right? It's enough to sort of bring that on. So today we're talking about learning, and I think this is important enough for me to ask the class, what does that mean? Like, we're here to learn. Okay, what is that? It's totally nonsense. What is learning? Yes?
Gathering information.
Okay, so I can throw information at you. There's another step. Yes?
The process of acquiring through experience new and relatively enduring information or behaviors.
Perfect. Beautiful. And so you're getting this information and it's going to change something. It's going to change what you know. You're going to know more because you came here and listened, hopefully. Right? Or you're going to do something differently. So your body has learned that the microwave beep means food is coming, and your body has learned to salivate because of that. And so notice that the changing your behavior part doesn't require cognition. You didn't have to think about that microwave thing so your body would learn that. In fact, learning is something that happens in really simple animals, not, right? Like sea slugs can learn. So if you spray a sea slug or a snail with a jet of water, at first it'll sort of react. Hey, what's that? Do it again, it'll react again. By the time you've done it 5 times, 10 times, it's like, whatever. Well, it's not thinking that because it doesn't have brain or thoughts, but it does change its behavior to react less. And that doesn't require a kind of explicit thinking. Okay, so you can learn without being consciously aware that you're learning. So there's about 3 main ways that we learn, and one of them is through associative learning, and classical conditioning is an example of that. So your body is hardwired to respond to stimuli in a certain way. When I say stimuli, I mean a thing that you react to. If I wave a red flag at a bull, the red flag is stimulus, plural is stimuli, and charging you is the bull's natural response to that stimuli. And so that is called respondent behavior. Your salivating to food is respondent behavior. It's a natural response to the food. Salivating to a microwave beep is not normal respondent behavior. You're not born associating beeps with food. You learn that. But then we can learn that certain things predict that. So your body can learn that a microwave beep predicts food, because every time you hear that beep, then there's food. Okay, that's learned. So we generalize that response to stimuli that predict it. You generalize your salivation to the microwave beep. And then that is now called a conditioned response. Salivating to the beep is conditioned, it's learned, right? You weren't born that way. And we can also learn through consequences. So if you do something like park in the wrong street, and you say you get a fine, you're punished, then you will learn not to do that. For some of us, it takes a few more trials than others. But now if you're rewarded for something, if you are paid for studying, then you might study more. Now, it is possible to undermine people's natural motivation to do something by rewarding them. So it's not an absolute rule that by giving a reward, you always increase its behavior. It's not like a universal law like gravity. But in general, reward someone for doing something. Give your kid what they want when they're having a tantrum. They will have more tantrums. Right? You can get that? That's called the law of effect. And then we can also learn through acquisition of mental information. You are all sitting here and listening to me, and I'm talking, and you're understanding what I say, and you're taking notes, and that's all happening at a cognitive level. Okay, so that is another way you can learn. So let's say that it is true that if you touch a hot stove, it will burn you, and that sucks. Well, you can learn that through experience. You could touch the hot stove, damn, you got burned, now you're not going to do that again. Or you could watch it happen to your little brother. And now you're like, okay, I'm not going to do that. It didn't happen to you, You learned it watching it happen to your brother. That's observational or sort of social learning, especially when it happens to another person. And then there's that cognitive level. Your mom will tell you, don't touch that stove or else. So those are three main ways that we can learn. If something is rewarded or punished, we learn to do something because it's rewarded. A rat learns to push a lever, not because it's a natural behavior that's innate to rats, but because they get a food pellet for doing it. That's called operant behavior. And that type of learning is called operant conditioning. I've decided that racing through this lecture is not a good idea, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go at it probably this pace, and then we'll end where we end, and then I'll take the rest of it home. Okay, so the most basic form of learning, the thing that you can do to a sea slug, is classical conditioning. And the name Ivan Pavlov may ring a bell for many of you. What did Pavlov do?
Pavlov's dog.
Yes, that's what he's famous for. So he used to study digestion in dogs, and that would of course involve feeding the dogs. And what he noticed was maybe he's thinking, okay, salivation is something that occurs when food is put in the mouth. So he's trying to understand how digestion works. Okay, maybe that's what he's thinking. But he actually noticed that these dogs start salivating buckets when they just hear the researchers coming down the hall. Why do you think they do that? Like sound of boots on the floor. Why would you salivate to that?
Because it's often associated with dog.
Exactly. Perfect. Right? You kind of learned. It's adaptive to be able to predict what's going to happen. And these dogs know that the sound of footsteps coming down the hallway, at maybe 5 p.m., not that they can read time, they have some sense of time, means dinner is coming, and they start salivating. And this shows psychology is a really objective science because you can measure saliva. That's what his research assistants do. Research assistants do a lot of interesting things. So you get, cubic centimeters of saliva in order to test his theory. So here's how classical conditioning works. So you have an unconditioned response, the natural response to something. So let's say there's food, and the natural response is salivation. And then maybe you have, a stimulus and response. So the unconditioned stimulus would be the food.
You're good.
When I say unconditioned, think kind of natural, not trained. And then the response is salivation. And then we have a conditioned stimulus and a conditioned response. The conditioned stimulus is the thing that you didn't have a response to before, at least not in the context of, say, salivation. Maybe if you hear a beep, your natural unconditioned response would be to go look, be like, what caused that beep? We're thinking about salivation, and it's not normal to salivate to beep. So then the conditioned stimulus would be like the tone or the sound or the beep or the bell. And then the conditioned response is salivating to the beep. I am going to put this on the test, and I want you to show me that you can apply this. So as a class, can you come up with another example? So I want the unconditioned stimulus, the natural response to it, conditioned stimulus, and a conditioned response to it. Anyone come up with anything? You're going to train a response to something that it's not your body's natural response.
Is the second US supposed to be a UR?
Yes, it is. Good catch. Your laptop thing showing. It's still going.
Tom?
All right, I'll give you another one.
Oh, it's still gone.
If you see lightning, it means thunder is going to happen, and you're scared of thunder.
The unconditioned stimulus is thunder. The unconditioned response is your response to the fear or the fear itself.
It's got to be behavior, because behaviorists are doing this, but I like that you had the unconditioned stimulus, because the thunder, what might your body do naturally when you hear a loud boom?
Tense.
Yeah, something you can see that shows fear. Like, I don't know, maybe you cringe, or you jump, or you startle, some kind of fear behavior. Now, what is the thing that is predicting this loud sound? Yes?
Seeing lightning.
Perfect! And now, what are we going to do when we see the lightning? Put your hand.
Yeah, I was gonna say, shouldn't the thing that you're scared of be the lightning, not thunder? Wouldn't it be the other way around?
So let's say there's the lightning happens before sun, thunder.
Sure.
I don't go out very much, but the idea is that there's lightning. You see the light first because light travels more quickly than sound, even though they happen at the same way in space. So there's lightning. So you see this, you get the visual information first, and the next thing that happens is that there's thunder. And that's a big, crashy, loud thing that scares you. So the lightning is a predictor. And then, what's the conditioned response?
The same thing as the thunder.
Exactly. It's the kind of the cringing or seeming fearful. So I'm going to say fearful behavior to the lightning. Any questions about that? No? You good?
I have a question, actually.
Yes.
If the lightning comes before the thunder, would it be the unconditioned stimulus, or?
No, so I'm assuming that you have no reaction to the lightning. It's possible that there's somebody out there that's terrified of lightning,
Right.
and this experiment would fall apart.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to argue that the big clap of thunder is what you're afraid of,
Right.
and then the lightning is your signal. It's going to happen, and now you're reacting to the signal instead of the thing itself.
Gotcha.
And that's a really adaptive behavior because you can save yourself from all kinds of situations by being aware and reacting to what predicts them before it actually happens. John Watson was a famous behaviorist science and behaviorist psychologist, was influenced by Pavlov. And as a behaviorist, he thought the only thing psychology needs to study is people's behavior. We don't care what you think or what you feel, right? I don't need to know or care about your experience of fear. I'm just going to watch your fearful response, and that is enough for me as the psychologist. That's the behaviorist position. And he would say, well, what we want to do is ultimately use psychology to control people's behavior. And so we just sort of watch things at that level. Most researchers, so psychologists today would be into that objective kind of view of measuring things, watching behavior that you can see and agree that's happening, but not without reference to mental processing. So today, the definition of psychology does include your thoughts and your feelings. And if you're going to see a psychologist, it's probably to talk about your thoughts and your feelings, right? Now, Watson studied this kind of fear conditioning with his graduate student, Rosalie Rayner. They had a very famous experiment called the Little Albert experiment. Is anyone familiar with that? Have you read about it? Yes, I think I saw your hand first. Did I see your hand? No. I was imagining things. I saw a hand over here. Yes.
They put like a rat in front of him, and then there was a beep, and then they managed to associate the rat with like getting scared, and the beep was going to come once he saw the rat.
You're exactly right, except it's not a beep. There was someone behind this poor little baby, and they banged the metal head behind his head, so it was more like thunder in that sense. So they let little Albert play with a rat. Little Albert was a little baby in the hospital. His mom probably didn't know this was happening. And he had no fear of the rat. He liked the rat, played with the rat, and they thought, can we teach him to be afraid of this rat? And so what they did, as you said, was they made a noise that he was scared of. So put the rat on, to play with him, And then the research assistant banged something metal that was behind his head. It scared him. And then what do you think would happen when they gave little Albert the rat to play with after that? Yeah, he was scared. Now, something else happened that they thought was very interesting scientifically. So they taught him to be afraid of this white rat. And then they showed him things like a Santa beard or a bunny. And he was scared of them too. What do you think happened there?
It was associated with the, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, sure. You've heard. Yeah, so that's called generalization. So we can generalize that response to other similar things. And in fact, what happened, Pavlov was able to show this too. So one experiment he did was, he put some kind of a buzzer thing on, probably around the hip area of the dog, and then make that thing buzz and teach the dog that it'll get food. And then the dog will learn to salivate in response to that buzzer thing on his body. Then he tried putting the buzzer on other locations of the body. He got less and less saliva. Remember, there's researchers collecting the saliva every time he does this. And it was like when he put it on the front paw, they still salivated, but it was a lot. It was less. It was like half as much saliva. And so that illustrates the principle of generalizability. We can generalize from rats to other white fluffy things, but keep going with that and it's going to stop somewhere. Right? Like maybe if you put the buzzer on the dog's toe, it wouldn't respond anymore. If you teach a dog to salivate to a bell, that's linked with certain sort of tone or frequency or pitch of the bell. And you start using different bells or different sounds, you still get a response, but less and less and less. And there'd be a point at which it doesn't respond anymore. So maybe the dog would not salivate to the sound of a cell phone ringing, and that's called discrimination. Okay? So at that point, the dog would be discriminating between the sound of the cell phone and the sound of the bell it was conditioning by, well, it's not really thinking, but if it were thinking, it would say, yeah, that's too different. So, to try this again, in the little Albert experiment with the rat, what's the unconditioned stimulus?
The rat?
And so what is he reacting to? So we're going to have, there's a reaction in the kit that we're watching for. And natural, what's the natural reaction that the scientists are measuring?
Fear?
Yeah, it's like crying or something like that. So the unconditioned response, maybe remember it has to be a behavior, so it might be crying or screaming. And the baby does that naturally in regard to what?
Sound.
Yes, loud, scary sound. And now, what is this rat we're now scared of?
The neutrals?
Yeah, it's the conditioned stimulus. Is that what we said?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I can't hear through the masks very well. But you're exactly right. It's the conditioned stimulus. And then the conditioned response is being afraid of the rat. Any questions? Yes.
Sorry, could you repeat what the neutral stimulus and the unconditioned stimulus are?
Oh, sorry. Same thing. The unconditioned stimulus.
Are they both the rat?
Oh my goodness. I'm like so frazzled from that late start. There's a natural response to a loud sound. So an unconditioned stimulus, or sort of like almost like a natural stimulus, is the loud sound, and we're going to condition that. We're going to have a conditioned response of some kind of fearful behavior to the rat, and the rat is now the conditioned stimulus. A good question. I'll have to look at that again. Before anything happens, right?
Yeah.
Before the rat learns to fear the rat, it's a neutral stimulus.
Okay.
Thank you for that excellent observation.
Sure.
All right, we've already talked about this. So your conditioned response will generalize to other similar things, but only so far. At some point, some bell is too high or too low, and the buzzer is placed too far away, and the dog's not reacting anymore. And And that's the graph of what we just talked about. And you can see that he got the most saliva when he placed it on its pelvis, but when it was on like his shoulder, it's a lot less, and less time gets the paw, we're only salivating as much. So that's demonstrating discrimination. Now, there's higher order conditioning. Let's say that your cat learns to come running at the sound of the can opener. It's opening the food. This probably happens, right, if you have a cat or a dog. There's things you do before you put the food in front of them that mean that they're already there, right? And so the sound of the can opener might become the conditioned stimulus. But what if there's something that predicts you using the can opener? You opening the cupboard to take out the can. They're already there, right? So that's a higher order stimulus. And then again, that's only gonna go so far. So maybe your cat's noticing when you're opening the cupboard door, but there's something you do before you open the cupboard door, and maybe that's just getting too complicated for the cat now. Can conditioning be unlearned? So let's say we taught this dog to salivate to a bell. Now you ring the bell, and it salivates. What if you keep ringing the bell and not pairing food? You do that once. You do that twice, no food. 3 times, no food. Poor dog. 10 times, no food. What do you expect to have happen?
The response to like change.
I need you to speak louder because
The response would change.
It would change. Would it salivate more or salivate less?
Probably less, because it's starting to think, oh, there is no food anymore.
Exactly. That is what happens. And that's called extinction. So the conditioned response, so salivation, would eventually extinguish if you stopped pairing it with the bell. However, it's not losing what it's learned. When we talk about memory, we'll learn that when you're remembering things, it's like putting things up in an attic. And unless you have some brain damage or the attic is on fire, it's up in there. Your problem is pulling it out again. So the dog has learned this. It's not going to stay there, but it's actually learned a second thing, right? It's now learned, and that doesn't work anymore. And we know this because there's something called spontaneous recovery, because a lot of our learning, now it sounds like we're learning just a pairing, but we're actually learning in a context. And so you go to a different context, you do something called spontaneous recovery. So now the dog isn't in the lab, the dog is in the park, and hears that sound again, and it starts salivating. It comes back, because it wasn't suppressed. There was a failure of that suppression that was associated with the context. This is important when it comes to treatment for drug addiction. We'll get there. Okay, actually got there right now. There are applications of, say, classical conditioning, say in advertising. I wonder if that will work. No, it doesn't. Okay, so what an advertisement will do is it might show you a certain pairing. Now, this isn't happening to you. You were not experiencing drinking the alcohol and being happy with your friends, but you were observing and you learned from watching your brother burn himself with a stove, right? So the advertisement is showing this bottle of Coke. Oh, wow, look at it. It's got this water droplets running off it. And someone's drinking the Coke and, that was so great. And you're watching that and learning, right? They're showing you somebody undergoing some classically conditioned learning. Drink Coke, feel great. That's what advertisers do. And then you can also watch sort of operant. We'll have operant conditioning as well in advertisements. So what would be, can anyone think of an example of operant conditioning for advertisement? Somebody uses a product and then something like they can't get a date, but then they wear these jeans and their crush is like, let's go for coffee. So they were rewarded for doing it. And you're sort of, you, the observer, are watching this and maybe getting that idea. So we can use this in treating anxiety disorders. So let's say that especially phobia, somebody's really scared of a spider. So what the psychologist would do is we're going to condition the opposite to spiders. So right now you have conditioned fear to a spider. Maybe there's a bit of a biological basis to that. Maybe you had a terrible experience with a spider. But now the psychologist is going to try to condition relaxation to spiders, because relaxation is the opposite of anxiety. And the way they would do that is that maybe first you're in the counseling setting and they'll calm you down, count to 10, get into a really relaxed state. And now we're not going to drop a spider down your shirt. That would be too much at once. We'll start really, really small. And maybe, how is the word spider spelled? That's not scary. We can do that. And now we'll raise your anxiety a bit, but we can relax you again. And now you're at the point where you can think about the word spider. Maybe we can get you to the point where you can draw a spider. And sure, that brings your anxiety up, but we can bring you back down with relaxation. Keep doing that to the point that now you're okay with drawing cartoon spiders. And then we can keep going and going to eventually the point where maybe you could have a tarantula in your hand and you're okay with that. Now in reality, psychologists don't usually have tarantulas in their office, but they use these sort of virtual reality headset things, so it would sort of look like there's a spider coming out of your hand. But you can work a person up to the place where they're okay with that, and then maybe they can carry on with their lives in a way that's not interrupted by their phobia of spiders. Now we talked about how conditioning happens in a context, and that matters with something like drug addiction. So when drug users die of a drug overdose, it often happens that they were using their regular dose, not something more than their old dose. They know their way around this drug, but they did it in a new setting. So if you were to use a drug in a particular place, let's say there's an apartment and a living room on that couch, your body's going to condition a reaction to this couch. If you take a drug the first time, it'll have, let's say, a big effect on you. What happens if you keep using the same drug over time?
Build tolerance.
Yes, you need more and more to get the same effect. And that's because your body has something called a counter-regulatory response. And, you have that glass of alcohol in front of you, and part of your body's like, okay, let's get ready for this, right? Part of your tolerance is your body resisting, it's learned to resist that response, or let's say a depression of your central nervous system, because it's trying to keep you normal, right? It wants to keep you in homeostasis. And that counter-regulatory response is partly conditioned to the environment that people are used to using the drug in. Okay, so we're going to do the heroin on that couch that it's conditioned to. Okay, the person needs a larger dose because they have this counter-regulatory response that, the chair, the sofa to some, it's triggering, right? Now we're going to go do that same drug somewhere else, and you're not priming the counter-regulatory response. And now all of a sudden it's way too much for that person, even though they've used that dose before. This also comes up in overcoming addiction because there's so many triggers in that environment that somebody could get clean in one of these spa-like rehab centers, and maybe they are completely sober and clean, this is great, and then they go home to that old apartment and to that old couch, and it'll trigger their old cravings again and their old habits. So for that reason, people are often advised to start out in a new place where you don't have those conditioned associations with the environment. Okay, so that was classical conditioning, and now let's dive into operant conditioning. So operant conditioning is when we learn to do something or not do something because there are consequences. The law of effect, as written up by Edward Thorndike, would say that we are more likely to do something we're rewarded for and less likely to do something that we're punished for. And he demonstrated this experimentally with cats who were put in this kind of box. So he puts a hungry cat in what's called a puzzle box, and then the cat has to figure out how to get out of the box to the fish. He's using the cat's food motivation. This does not work with a cat that's not hungry. It just goes to sleep and doesn't care. Hungry cat wants the fish, okay? And it has to do something in order to get out of the box, push a lever. And the cat will eventually figure it out and get to the fish. And if you put the cat back in the box, it will do that again. Right? It'll repeat that behavior. Cats are kind of trial and error learners. Even if they did something crazy to get in the box, they'll do that crazy thing again. Anyway, what that all sort of demonstrated experimentally is that you can get an animal to do something that it's rewarded for doing. And the whole lever press for food pellets is based on that. You can teach a rat to push a lever to get food through operant conditioning. It doesn't really care about the lever, it cares about the food. But those two things have become paired. Right? So it will be rewarded for pushing the lever. You may have heard of Skinner boxes, so that classic lever press situation happens in an apparatus called a Skinner box. So maybe there's a signal here that says like green light or a red light, and maybe you can teach this rat that when the green light comes on, you can push the lever to get food. But when the red light comes on, it needs to push the lever in order to avoid, let's say, a foot shock to the floor of that apparatus. So animals can learn to do something to avoid something they don't want, to say avoid a foot shock. Reinforcer and punisher. I want to clear those up with my eraser. So a reinforcer is something that increases a behavior. And the behavior is any sort of observable action. So a reinforcer increases that behavior. And then a punishment, maybe we'll call that punisher, just to keep it parallel form, decreases it. But there's kind of two ways we could do that. So let's say that I want to decrease the behavior. I want to stop you from doing something. I want to stop you from picking your nose. That's the behavior, okay? We can have a positive punishment. And positive doesn't mean nice or fun. It just means we're adding something. We're doing something. Or it could be negative, and we take away something. So if I gave you an electric shock every time you picked your nose, that would be like a positive function. It's doing something to you that you don't like, so you do less of that behavior. So say a shock. This would be an unethical experiment, by the way. And then a negative punishment would be taking away something you like. You like your freedom, so putting you in timeout. You like your money, so taking away your money. You have to, if I catch you, you have to pay a fine. Okay, let's try and apply that positive, negative thing with a reinforcer. We want to reinforce behavior. We want you to do more of something. More of it. Say you want to teach yourself to study more. Spend more time studying. How could you give, what would be a positive reinforcer for studying? Yes?
Give yourself a snack every time you finish.
Excellent. So a food reward. So like, I don't know, snack. And then what would be a negative reinforcer?
If you don't finish, you don't use social media for the night.
Yeah. So we're going to take away something that you like.
Yeah.
In order to increase the behavior of studying.
Yeah.
I think that works. Another example is like your seatbelt thing. So there's a beeping sound that goes on in your car before you put your seatbelt on. It's annoying and loud. You want to get rid of it, and that gets you to put on your seatbelt, and it rewards you. You're like, the beeping stopped. And it's a reinforcer because it increased your rate of seatbelt putting on, but it took away something you didn't like. Any questions about that? a reinforcer increases the behavior. You can do it by giving you something you like, taking away something you don't like. A punisher decreases, or punishment decreases behavior. We can do that by doing something nasty to you, kind of like spanking a child, or by taking away something nice, putting the child into timeout. And that's the slide I just talked about, without having the slide up. So positive reinforcement is like adding something good or something you want. It increases the behavior. It strengthens the response. Now we're still talking about reinforcement, but negative reinforcement. We take something bad away. We stop that beeping sound in your car. Now you put your seatbelt on. Right? It's a stimulus that when removed, strengthens the response. You put on your seatbelt in order to stop the sound. So a primary reinforcer is kind of an unlearned in nature reinforcer. So food's an example. You naturally sort of want food. But then we can learn some things are secondary reinforcers because they are associated with primary reinforcers. Money is just a piece of paper. But if you found $100 on the ground, you'd be like, yay, I found $100. Well, it's just a piece of paper with germs on it. Why do you care? Because you know, through your cognitive knowledge and through your experience, that this can get you things that you like, that are ultimately positive reinforcers. Reinforcers can be immediate or delayed. So you can give a rat the pellet immediately after it pushes the lever, or you could like, wait a minute. It's a lot harder to teach the rat that way. It's easier to teach people things when you give them the reward like immediately after they do the behavior. But unlike we deal with a lot of delayed rewards. Now, you can't tell a rat to go push a lever to get food. And the way researchers do that is something called shaping. So let's say you have this kind of, don't draw over here, you have this Skinner box set up, and the lever is over here. And then what you might do, you put the rat in a cage and it runs around, is start giving it a food pellet out of this, there'd be a chute over there. I'm terrible at drawing, but you can do that. Maybe you start by letting the pellet come out when it's in the half of the cage that the lever is in. Do that a few times and it'll start hanging around in this part of the cage, assuming it's hungry enough to go. And then maybe you step it up after it's learned that, and now it needs to be this close to the lever. And once it learns that, you step it up even more, and now it has to be that close to the lever. Finally, you only give it a pellet when it's touching the lever. And then, only when it's pressing the lever. And then that's how you teach a rat to push a lever to get food, through shaking. It's called the method of successive approximations. And if you were training your cat to use a toilet instead of a litter box, you'd be doing the same thing. Reinforcing the cat for being near the toilet. Reinforcing the cat for right, step by step by step, until you finally get it doing this complicated thing. Apparently people can train their cats to do that. Now, let's say that there's different ways we could give this pellet to the rat. Every single time the rat pressed the lever, you gave it a pellet. One press, one pellet. Every single time. One press, one pellet. That's a ratio scale because a ratio schedule because it's based on the press itself. Now, you could change that up. You could say, I'm only going to give you a pellet for every 5 presses. It takes longer for a rat to learn that, but they can learn that. So every time the rat pushes the lever 5 times, then we'll give it a treat. You want another treat? You'll push it another 5 times, however long that takes you. That's a fixed ratio reinforcement schedule. Ratio because it's based on the sort of number of responses, and it's fixed because it's always after 5 presses, always after 1 press. There's that regularity you can count on. But we could mix up this poor little rat even more. Okay, we could say, I will reward you for the lever presses after an average of 5 responses. So sometimes it'll be 5, but other times you'll get it after 1, and other times you'll get it after 10. And this changes the rat's behavior. What do you think happens to the rat when sometimes it has to go 10 times, but sometimes it gets it after 1 press? It pushes that bar like nuts. Because now, well, it's pushed it 9 times, but it can still be coming, so it keeps going. You know those slot machines? You put money in, and they pull a lever, and it spins, and it's supposed to come up like all, I don't know, 300 or something. It uses that exact principle to get people to put their money in the machine. Because you never know when you're going to get it. Maybe this time, oh, you didn't get it that time. Well, maybe now. It exploits that principle. So we just talked about a fixed schedule where it's like after every 5 lever presses, after every 1 lever presses, after every 10 coffees, get 1 free. And then it can be variable when we sort of say, well, it's after an average of 5. It's after an average of 10 coffees, get 1 free, but maybe it'll be an extra. Nobody does that, but it would get you to buy more coffee, theoretically. Okay? But then we can base it not on number of lever presses, but we can base it on time. So let's say you have to push the lever to get the treat, but it will be after 5 minutes. And maybe I don't care if you pushed it 1 time or 2 times, you only have to push it once, but it'll happen after 5 minutes. Or maybe I'll say you have to push it 5 times in 5 minutes. But if it's always after 5 minutes, you get the reward after 5 minutes, at 10 minutes, at 15 minutes. That has a fixed character, and that would be a fixed interval schedule. But we could do that same thing. We could make it variable. We could say that after an average of 5 minutes, if you've done your level press, you'll get a reinforcer. And these 4 reinforcement schedules affect behavior in different ways, and the variable ones tend to increase because you never know when it's going to come, right? You keep looking at your phone because there might be a message on it. Skinner showed this experimentally with pigeons. He got them to peck something. They can't lever press. I think they can like pick a spot. And these, I don't love this graph because they're not all starting at the same origin because they want to make room for the graphs. So you pull it back to the point of origin. So just sort of think it at the slope. And you can see that some of these reinforcement schedules result in more behavior than others. And so you look at the sort of slope of this line, being like a lot of presses. So in a short amount of time, we're going to get from 10 to 20. Okay, that's your slot machine. Where you're just feeding money into it. Have you been in a bar and seen people just feed money to those things? It's because they're thinking that the next time I put money in, I might get it, I might get that payout. The machine trains you to sort of think that, but it does screw you with money. Now we have that interval schedule. So let's say if you push the lever 5 times, you get a pellet, but after 5 minutes. So what the pigeon learns to do is just not care until the 5 minutes are already almost up, and it'll go, what did you go back? So you get this scallop reinforcement schedule. Okay, so this is the first, so let's say it's learned this, the first 5 minute interval, and I'm not going to bother, Oh, you get my 5 comes in, and the number of pecks and responses goes up. Okay, all right, I got my pellet, and I can't get another one for another 5 minutes. I get my 5 presses in, and oh, it's almost, it's almost time for me to do that, and I'm going to do all of it. And this is what happens to students' study patterns. So if you have a test or a midterm, you have to get all this studying done before the test. Most students, because it's a function of this behavioral functions type of reinforcement schedule, will not study, not study, not study, not study, oh shit, and then cram. So if you're like any big pigeon, then in this class, right, you know that you have a test, a little quiz, sorry, due every Sunday at 5. So you'll probably, and you know that you have to read your book and listen to the lectures and review your notes by then, but will you do that on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? You'll start getting a little anxious, right? But you might find yourself kind of pulling it all together, I don't know, on Sunday afternoon. That's a very normal thing to do. And so, as an instructor, knowing that students are going to be doing that, I don't like the idea of grading based on, let's say, 2 large exams, right? I'd rather spread it out, and it's always going to be scalloped, but the more tests I can do, the closer these scallops can be, right? Because I want to get you to a point of steady responding, and I'm trying to approximate that by giving regular quizzes. But now let's say that I wanted you to be studying all the time, right? As much as you can. How should I distribute my tests then? Yes?
Variable ratio?
Variables is kind of always better than fixed because it scares you a little. But for steady responding, it's like you never know when you're going to get the test.
Variable interval.
Can't hear you.
Variable interval.
Exactly. Pop test. It's going to be a test, but you don't know when it is. That'll keep you studying on Monday and Tuesday, because you don't know if there's going to be a test on Wednesday. But I think that would get a very high level of responding, but I think it would be pretty stressful too. So the best I can do, if I'd like to get that kind of behavior without actually doing that to you, so you know when the test is coming up, is to have them spaced at really short intervals. They'll still be scalloped, but imagine how dramatically scalloped it would be if you just had a midterm and a final. Right? A lot of students fall between the cracks that way because they haven't kind of learned the study skills, and would naturally resort to cramming because that's just kind of what your mind is geared to do. All right, I think we've already covered this. There are some dangers associated with punishment. So some parents might say they spank their child when their child does something naughty. But some parents might give it time out. And there's a reason for that. So a punished behavior is suppressed. Remember, we don't unlearn things. And learning is conditioned to context. Let's say the naughty thing your kid was doing was saying a swear word. You might teach your child through punishment at home never to say swear words. But then your child might go and say them in school, right? Because it's a different context, and they can bring it up there. So it teaches people to discriminate between environments and kind of keep doing it where they can do it. They can also teach fear of the person administering the punishment. So if you're a parent or a teacher and you're punishing your child or your student, the student or the child may come to fear you because you are now associated with punishment. And punishment can have an aggressive character to it, and it models aggression as a way to cope with a problem. The best thing you can do really is try to reinforce people for the behavior you want to see. So do you know what you're going to try? What are you trying to make them do? If it's not that, reinforce them for doing what you want. That has to be part of the equation, even if you're using punishment. Say, no, definitely don't do that. You still need to teach people what you want to see by reinforcing or rewarding that. There are many applications of operant conditioning. So there are like learning games where you can earn points or sort of rewards, for instance. If at work, if your boss praises you, that's operant conditioning for doing what your boss wanted you to do. If your boss scolds you, that's the punishment for doing what your boss doesn't want you to do. So that's operant conditioning. Shaping is used a lot in athletic performance, so you're training a rat to use a lever through shaping. Well, teaching a child to play baseball is going to follow the same principles. Oh, good job for, let's say, holding the bat the right way. And once they learn to do that, start praising them for doing the next thing, until the point that they're able to learn the whole technique. We use, in operant conditioning, we can use discrimination in order to learn about animal cognition. A pigeon can't tell you what it thinks, but we know that pigeons have some numerical ability because we can condition them, we can operant condition them to peck the right number, right? So that pigeon there has got some kind of little math problem, and the correct response is the one that's pecking. And if the animal can learn to do that, it's telling you that it understands that at some level. Conditioning is a process, and it doesn't all happen at once. The dog doesn't learn to salivate to a bell the first time. It takes a few trials. However, we are biologically primed in some ways. And so let's say you get very sick after let's say you pair orange juice and vodka, you're not a big orange juice drinker, you get really sick from the vodka, you might never want to see orange juice again. So your body is ready to do that. And that was demonstrated, we're almost at the end, in an experiment by Bandura and Colin. And they used punishment for water that was flavored with something, or they compared water with a nasty sound. It was really hard for the animals to learn that they could get punished for drinking this water unless it was flavored, because we have this biological predisposition to associate the sickness with the flavored water rather than with the sound. And I'm sorry I rushed a little. I will talk to the department chair about this whole classroom management issue. And I'd like to talk to the class in here, but we should be ready to interrupt for the next class.
Hello again. I am back in the lab after lecture, and if you attended lecture, you will know that there were a lot of tech issues, and the previous lecturers need to upload the video of his lecture meant that we didn't get started until quite late, and then there were more tech problems. So I think that recording lectures to support hybrid learning is going to be a journey. I therefore encourage you to come to the in-person lecture if you can and if you're comfortable. It takes me a very long time, about 2 days, to make a lecture video from scratch, edit it, produce it. And so I am hoping to be able to record in lecture. I am grateful to the student who recorded the lecture you just saw there from his desk and from his laptop. I will be working with classroom support to try to get recording going more smoothly. Since we started the lecture late, I had to end late, and I'm going to give you the rest of the lecture here. I think you'll find the sound quality is better. I'm going to go back to Garsha and Kelling's experiment, the famous, groundbreaking, bright, noisy water experiment, which tells us about how the body is hardwired to learn certain associations more easily than others. So let's take a look at those graphs there. Now, the researchers in this experiment gave the rats water that was paired with a flavor. That's just flavored water. They put some flavor in the water. Or bright, noisy water. What is bright, noisy water, I hear you ask? Well, imagine that anytime you took a drink, I turned on a bright light and played a loud noise. That water is now paired with brightness and noise. That's your bright, noisy water. The graphs show how much water the rats drank pre-conditioning and post-conditioning when the water was either paired with an X-ray or a foot shock. The X-ray has radiation that caused the rats to feel sick afterwards. The foot shock will cause immediate pain to the rat. So the first graph, this one over here, is showing what happens when we pair this special water with a sickness-inducing X-ray, or when we pair it with a shock to the foot through the bottom of the cage. Now the red bar is your flavored water, and the blue bar is your bright, noisy water. Before conditioning, and remember that in the conditioning, we're pairing drinking the water with either a sickening X-ray or a painful foot shock. We can see by comparing the red bars for the flavored water before conditioning and after conditioning that the rats drink a lot less of that flavored water after they've had the sickness experience from the X-ray. But it doesn't seem to affect their consumption of bright, noisy water. They're drinking just about as much bright, noisy water after the X-ray than before the X-ray. What this is showing you is that the researchers were very easily able to condition the rats to avoid the flavored water after they felt sick, but they couldn't condition the feeling of sickness or the desire for sickness avoidance to the bright, noisy water. It's like the rats somehow weren't ready to make that association. In the real world, it makes sense that we might get sick after eating some spoiled food and then do well to not eat that again, not eat something that tastes like that again, to want to avoid it. And you can see that coming through in that first graph. Make the rats sick after they had some weird flavored water. They're going to avoid that water afterwards. But they don't show the same readiness to associate the sickness to the bright, noisy water. Maybe that makes less sense in the real world. Now, a foot shock is like a kind of physical harm, and it makes sense that physical harm would be paired with some kind of a physical stimulus, like a light or a sound. Maybe before a rat is attacked by a cat, it sees a cat, that's visual, and it might hear the cat. Well, cats are pretty quiet. Cats definitely try to manage that situation. But anyway, the idea is that physical harm is easier to associate with visual stimuli with physical stimuli like light and noise. So now let's see what happens to our special water consumption rates pre and post conditioning with foot shock. Okay, so in the second graph, what we're showing is how much special water, either flavored water or bright, noisy water, they are drinking before versus after a foot shock is paired with that consumption. And now it seems like there's not much difference in the amount of the flavored water they're drinking. They don't seem to be readily making that association. But look at the big difference between the blue bars. So preconditioning, they're drinking about as much bright, noisy water as flavored water. But after there's been an experience of foot shock following the water consumption, now we're avoiding that bright, noisy water. What this shows experimentally is that animals are more ready, more likely to form associations that sort of make evolutionary sense. It's easy to teach a rat to avoid sickness-inducing food. And in fact, ranchers use this strategy with wolves. So they might leave some, so let's say ranchers don't like wolves hunting their sheep or their lambs, they might leave some lamb carcasses around that are laced with a drug that will make the wolf sick. It won't kill the wolf or hurt the wolf, but it'll make it feel pretty nasty. Well, And once they've been through that, they're a lot less interested in the lambs. There are biological constraints on what you can train an animal to do. People who work with animals that perform train them to do all kinds of amazing things. However, one can only take that so far, and trained animals can quite easily revert to their natural behaviors. So the Berlands, their famous animal behaviorists, Keller Berland and Marion Berland, they trained pigs to put a coin in a piggy bank. How cute. But the pigs kind of reverted to doing piggy things with the coin. They started pushing it around the ground with their trunks instead of doing what they were supposed to do, which is put it in the piggy banks, because they have this overwhelming urge to root around. That's a pig thing to do. So the natural behaviors can overwhelm the trained behaviors. They can come up again. That's one of the reasons why it is so dangerous to keep animals like lions, animals that are not domesticated as pets. So why can't you have a fox as a pet? Why do you have to have a dog? Well, a fox is not domesticated, and an animal that isn't domesticated can revert to species typical behaviors like attacking you. The trainers with the lion that pictures are the famous Siegfried and Roy, and unfortunately Roy was attacked by one of his lions. It wasn't a bad lion, it was just a lion being a lion, and he is made of meat, and he was severely and chronically injured by that. There are many stories of early career ends for lion tamers. Anyway, there's a picture of a raccoon there. One of the things that raccoons like to do is that they have these little hands, but they have very thick skin on their little hands, and if they want to explore an object, they will sometimes take it to water, and they'll put it under the water, and underwater they're able to get better feeling in their fingers to sort of explore the thing. It looks like they're washing it. Some people think they're washing food, but in fact raccoons will do this in completely filthy ponds, so it doesn't make sense that they're really cleaning the food or whatever they're dipping and washing. So it's really more about sort of exploring it with their hands than eating it while it's filthy. That's a raccoon thing to do. But there was a problem with training raccoons to do this same kind of task, because they take the tokens, which they were supposed to do something with, say put in a money box, and then they would and then instead of maintaining that trained behavior, they were more interested in taking the tokens and washing them. So we've talked about classical conditioning, where we learn to generalize a natural response to what we call the unconditioned stimulus, something like salivating to food, to something that predicts the food, like the sound of a bell. That's associative learning. And then we also know that we can learn through rewards and punishment. We can learn to do more of a behavior because we are rewarded for it, and less of behavior because we are punished for it. But then there's also cognitive learning. You can learn by reading a book, by listening to a lecture, by talking to people. The way that animals respond to reinforcement schedules, say by not bothering to press that lever until the last minute when they're on a interval reinforcement schedule, shows that they have some understanding of the schedule. A rat kind of gets that it doesn't need to do anything until the last minute. Now get those lever presses in and make sure you get your pellet. And that's a lot like you cramming before a test, right? That shows that the animal has the cognitive ability to develop some kind of an expectation of how and when their behavior will be reinforced or punished. If you punish your cat for scratching the sofa and it knows that, it sort of sees you and it doesn't do that, but let's say you walk away and your cat's like, and goes and scratches the sofa. It kind of shows that, or it suggests that your cat has some level of understanding that it can do this when you're not there. There's also something called latent learning, If you or a rat is in a building or a maze, and let's say you're walking around it just exploring, you're exploring the building, or the rat is just kind of checking out a maze, you're not trying to learn it spatially, but in fact you will. That learning is taking place even unconsciously. So if you're walking around a building and you're not trying to memorize the layout of the building, you're still learning it, and you're actually still remembering it, even though you may not be consciously aware of that. If you go back into the building, or if the rat would go back into the maze, it would find its way around pretty quickly. Something else that suggests some evidence of cognitive processes is the fact that we know that we can destroy people's intrinsic motivation by giving them excessive rewards. So if you were always paid to study, if you stopped being paid to study, you might be less interested in reading anything just for the sake of interest, because you've just kind of come to only do it for the money. And that demonstrates that people, that animals have some kind of cognitive learning that is going on just for the intrinsic motivation of being, well, interested in learning. We know that that exists because we can ruin it. Albert Bandura was the very famous psychologist who studied observational learning, and his famous study is the Bobo Doll experiment. And what he did was have children in an experimental setting see an adult handle stress by using, or say not using, violence. So something called a Bobo doll, and it's like a big plastic blown up doll with some a weight on the bottom that moves back and forth, and you could sort of punch it and maybe it would swing back at you and you could punch it again. I don't think kids play with these anymore. In his experiment, he had the kids play in a room with some tinker toys where they had the opportunity to see, where some of them had the opportunity to see an adult deal with their frustration by beating up this Bobo doll. Afterwards, the experimenters kind of pissed the kids off a little. They said, oh, these nice toys will be for the other children to play with. You go play with those crappy toys over there. You can imagine if you're a kid, you're feeling a little bit miffed. And the researchers left, and they left the kids alone with these tinker toys and the Bobo doll. And guess what the pissed off kids do if they've seen the adult beat up the Bobo doll? They will go do that. The kids who hadn't seen that were unlikely to go and do that. They might deal with their frustration some other way. However, if they had seen an adult beating up the Bobo doll, they were much more likely to go and do that. Children are primed to mimic adults, and in fact, researchers have set up experiments where adults just do zany things or nonsensical things, and the kids who are watching will then go and repeat it. That's observational learning. Animals, higher animals, can learn without direct experience by watching and imitating others. Advertisers exploit that a lot. There's a neural basis to imitation. They're called mirror neurons. When you see somebody else who is in pain, when you see somebody else eating an ice cream, there are frontal lobe neurons called mirror neurons, which sometimes scientists believe fire when either you perform an action or observe someone else doing it. This may be the basis of empathy. You see somebody in pain and somehow that hurts you a little. We don't imitate just anyone. If you saw somebody you really admire wearing jeans, maybe you would want to get a pair of jeans just like that. Now, if you saw a picture of Hitler wearing those jeans, maybe you wouldn't want them. we're more likely to imitate people that we like, people we can relate to, and people who have high social status. The people that companies hire to sponsor their products, to wear their clothes, are people who look like something we may be trying to look like. They may be celebrities or athletes that we look up to. And because they're using this product, now we want to use it too. This can be used pro-socially. We use modeling a lot to teach. I try to model some critical thinking for you by questioning the assumptions of the textbook and ripping into it. Gandhi was somebody who modeled a nonviolent response to conflict that inspired many other. Now, there's a flip side of that. We do know that parents who are abusive and have children who kind of grow up in that cycle of violence and are more aggressive. We know from experiments that viewing violent media does decrease helping behavior and promote aggressive behavior. People who act pro-socially tend to have a good conscience, and that is something that internalizes early on. Now, you've probably heard of learning styles. Are you a visual learner that learns by seeing graphs and charts, by looking at pictures and PowerPoints? Or maybe you're an auditory learner and you learn by hearing, by listening to a lecture, by having discussions, by repeating or teaching a friend. Or maybe you're a read-write type learner and you're somebody that really likes to read a textbook and to write notes. Or then maybe you're a kinesthetic learner and you want to have plasticine models and do lab experiments and incorporate body movement by turning your material into an interpretive dance. A hands-on learner. This is a very appealing theory because it's inclusive. It suggests, well, maybe there's diversity in how we learn and we can have a better and more effective and more inclusive classroom by catering to different learning needs. That is why it is such a popular theory. However, it is not empirically supported. Papers on this subject tend to start out with really positive introductions, and they make a prediction that would be expected by the theory, and then it doesn't pan out. While you may have a preference for learning a certain way, you can learn through all these different ways, and in fact, you're going to remember things best if you use as many of them as possible. You're more likely to pull the memory out of that cluttered attic in your head if you do so. If you give it more pathways in means more pathways out. And there certainly isn't any evidence to suggest that we can type people this way and then, okay, let's only deliver visual loaded content to the visual learners and they'll do better than if they got it other ways. And, let's go and give taped lectures and have discussions with the auditory learners. The theory just does not pan out empirically. While this is a debunked theory, you'll hear about it a lot because of its popularity. There's another one like that. It's the theory of multiple intelligences. Intelligence, which we will learn about next week, refers to general cognitive ability. And maybe there's some different factors, like maybe there's verbal intelligence, and that might be a bit different from your spatial intelligence. But what this researcher has done is kind of confuse intelligence with talent, saying, okay, you're good at music, so you're music smart. But I could keep going with this. I could say, well, you're good at cooking, so you're cooking smart. And, now there's a ninth intelligence. And you are good at knitting, so you are knitting smart. Those are talents. They don't refer to the general idea of intelligence. They don't tap into the construct of intelligence as general cognitive ability. But it's a very popular theory that you'll hear a lot about because it's warm-hearted and inclusive. Now, inclusion is a value, and I would argue that we can have inclusive attitudes and care about people and appreciate diversity while also accepting that there are differences in traits such as intelligence. In science, it's not enough to want a theory to be true because we like it. It has to be empirically supported. This one is not. Here's an example I found online. It's from An Educator's Guide to Teaching Styles and Learning Styles from somebody with a PhD at the University of San Diego. And what this person did was actually bung up the learning styles with the multiple intelligences, and what they're calling student learning styles are actually just those multiple intelligences from Gardner's model. So that's taking two debunked theories and consolidating them into one, and then talking about it as if it were true in a very academic style. You might read this and think the theory is supported, but is in fact not. That brings me to the end of the lecture. For next class on Thursday, please read modules 23, 24, and 25. We'll be talking about memory, because after you go learn something, you want to go store that learning. We'll talk about what that looks like. I'll see you soon.